With the annual commemoration of Africa Day on Monday, the 25th of May, the global focus will be on the celebration of unity and how the continent has come together to collectively address critical challenges. But with food security having been labeled as the greatest challenge of our time, to what extent is Africa united to collectively address this? And favorable policies as well as investments in agricultural infrastructure have emerged as the major drivers of food security improvements in Sub-Saharan Africa. This is according to results released by the Economist Intelligence Unit's Global Food Security Index. To discuss this, we are joined by Dr. Richard Okine, who is the Regional Director for DuPont Sub-Saharan Africa. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
To what extent can we say there is guaranteed food security on the African continent as per results of the survey?
Well, okay, so let me start off by saying that there is no guarantee about food security as we speak today. The results of the survey that were published indicates that a lot of the countries in Sub-Saharan Africa actually are in the fourth quartile of the food security performance by countries and so on. So we do have a long way to go, but that is the focus that a lot of the heads of states of the African countries and so on are focusing on in terms of the commitments that they have made in driving improvements in food security.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds a very high-level type of debate when we talk about food security, but in real terms, what do we mean when we say there's food security or not?
Well, okay, food security, the measure that is used actually analyzes about 19 specific categories that are basically spread over three broad areas. The areas being affordability, availability, and also the safety and quality that is associated with the food. So those are the areas, and there are some specific aspects of that. That is really in the analysis in terms of how affordable the food is, how nutritious the food is, and so when you add all of that up, you do get into the scores that range from 0 to 100, and most of the Sub-Saharan African countries are in the lower tier, meaning their scores are in the range of about maybe 30 or less. South Africa happens to be in the second quartile. I mean, they are 41st out of the 109 countries that are part of that survey.
I just want to get an understanding in terms of those who are living, below the poverty line. There are some section of the communities that are living, within abject poverty. How does this survey apply to them in terms of food security? Because some of the people there don't have knowledge of where their next meal is going to come from.
Okay, so that is really the idea of having the food security index is to have a quantitative or more objective measure that tells the countries in terms of where they are using these measures that are recognized as being really the key measures that you can use. And so the publication of the results actually focuses attention, in these countries and what the governments are doing to basically try to improve and get it down to the level where we're talking about very basic nutritional value in the food, and for them to try to drive the improvement. So the good news in that is that there is really tangible improvement in the scores that the countries have, and those are due more to actual change in policies and infrastructure investments that the governments working or partnering with private industry and so on are beginning to kind of bring that attention. So the change that occurred from last year to this year in the results actually indicate that there's real meaningful change in the infrastructure that is helping with that improvement.
Now, gauging this against population growth, we hear that there's going to be an estimated growth of about 1 billion people in the African continent, where now when people's numbers increase, what are we going to do then in terms of the supply and demand side of things?
Okay, so I am with DuPont Company, right? And we are a science company that we work on trying to bring scientific solutions to the major challenges that we have around the world. One of the ones that we focus on is around food and making food available to feed this increase in population. In Sub-Saharan Africa, we are approximately around close to 1 billion people. That is supposed to double by the year 2050. So, but that is exactly the kind of challenge that DuPont we're focusing on in trying to bring science and technology to help us be able to produce enough food to feed our population. There's some specific tangible things that we are doing in partnering with the various governments, NGOs, and other private companies in trying to bring our technology to improve the total value chain, including food production, but also things along the lines of transportation, the infrastructure that allows the food that is produced to be transported to where it needs to be. In most of the African countries, about 60% of the food that is produced is lost because of waste. And so part of what was driving the improvement that we saw was around the actual infrastructure where the governments are engaged with the public partnership in creating food storage systems to help preserve food that are produced and so on.
All right. Thank you very much for your insight into this.
Thank you.
Right. We are discussing food security with Dr. Richard Onyoike, and of course we're discussing the results released by the Economist Intelligence Unit on Global Security, Food Security Index. And of course, on to other news now. Trade and Industry Minister Rob Davis says government will intensify its support for industrial development and reindustrialization of the country. And he told MPs during his budget vote in Parliament today that this was the only sustainable way to reduce poverty, unemployment, and inequality.
Davis says in addition to its industrialization program, government was also devising strategies to attract more foreign direct investments. He said his department was facilitating 25 billion rands from foreign investments and the 18.5 billion from domestic sources, and that thousands of jobs were being created through these investments.
Let me emphasize again, these investments would not have happened without focused government support, its commitment to partner with the private sector, and the increasing impact of our industrial policy.
Mercedes-Benz South Africa's recent investment of 5.4 billion rands to expand its production capacity in East London. Davis said this alone created 550 direct and 400 indirect jobs. But there's another elephant in the room that might curtail these positive developments: the extension by American Senate of the African Growth and Opportunities Act, known as AGOA, by another 10 years. The new bill comes with strict conditions for South Africa in particular. It provides for regular reviews of the country's trade and investment policies with an emphasis on the openness to U.S. products. South Africa's compliance will be reviewed within 30 days of the enactment of the bill.
However, the reality is that with the many new conditions and changing dynamics of U.S. trade policy, the value of AGOA is diminishing while its costs are rising. I will raise the matter for discussion in Cabinet in the near future.
But Davis is already discussing this matter with businesses, especially those in the poultry industry. The United States insists South Africa must open its market to its poultry products. Failure to do so, it warned, may result in consequences, including the withdrawal from AGOA. Manelisi Tubase, SABC News, Parliament.
Germany's economic growth slowed slightly in the first quarter of this year, dragged down by decline in foreign trade. Germany is Europe's biggest economy. The economy expanded by 0.3% in the first 3 months of the year, from 0.7% in the end of 2014. This is weaker than neighboring France, where the economy grew by 0.6% on the quarter, and also disappointing compared with the Eurozone, where GDP growth peaked by 0.4%. The government expects the economy to continue growing at a modest pace this year, thanks to solid domestic demand. Well, we're going to take a breather, and when we return, the European Union and the Ukraine signed €1.8 billion financial assistance agreement. All the details with cash after the break.
Your World makes it its business every evening to round up the leading local stories and international news to keep you informed all the time.
Make a date with Your World every evening for all the news headlines around the world to keep you abreast with knowledge.
Catch Your World for headlines across the world every Monday to Friday from 9 p.m, then Saturday and Sunday from 7 p.m.
Welcome back. You're watching PM News. Let's take a look at stories making headlines at 6:30. Well, former Lesotho Prime Minister Tom Tabane has fled to South Africa because he now fears for his life. Tabane says he fled following an assassination attempt. The leader of the opposition All Basotho Convention is not attending the tabling of Lesotho's budget. He told the SABC his request to be guarded by the police was declined by the Lesotho government. Well, AU Commission Chair Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma says it's time the continent becomes more industrialized. Dlamini Zuma made the call during her presentation on youth at the Pan-African Parliament sitting in Midrand, Gauteng. The AU Commission Chair argues that young people have a crucial role to play in ensuring countries change their core economies. The Italian Navy has brought about 300 migrants and a body of a man to a port in Sicily's Augusta. The man is believed to have suffocated inside a wooden fishing boat they were traveling in. The majority of migrants were Eritrean and Egyptian nationals, with some coming from as far afield as Sudan and Syria. It's almost the weekend, and from the sports scene, of course, the Bulls suffered their second Super Rugby defeat on tour, losing 34-20 to the Chiefs in New Zealand. Well, that loss means that while the Bulls stay atop of the South African Conference for now, both the Lions and the Stormers have a chance to end round 15 in pole position. Humanitarian agencies are struggling to cope with an influx of refugees fleeing the political instability in Burundi, while the United Nations has now confirmed at least 27 cholera-related deaths on the shores of Lake Tanganyika across the border in Tanzania.
Some 60,000 have fled to Tanzania since the beginning of May, first to the remote village of Kakunga across the border, and then a 3-hour ferry to the port of Kigoma, where assistance is more readily available.
Refugees are in an isolated village in a shore that is not accessible by land, literally, and the only way to access it is by ship. Makes it a very desperate situation.
The World Health Organization has already warned of a severe humanitarian crisis, while the UN is rushing supplies to the region.
Following a cholera outbreak among Burundian refugees gathered on the shores of Lake Tanganyika, the UN Children's Fund has rushed relief supplies to the northwestern border with Tanzania. The outbreak has so far claimed 27 lives. Burundi's current unrest has forced more than 110,000 people to flee to neighboring countries.